Gracias.
Okay, I think everything is ready now, so let me start. Good afternoon, and perhaps good morning or good evening for those who are connected online. It is my great honor to chair this afternoon session. I have the honor to be asked by the Tunisian ambassador, Mezani. I have the honor to be asked to chair this part of the general conference. What we are going to today is to organize, to have an event on the launch of the Industrial Development Report 2020. But before that, let me make some logistical announcement. For the main committee, next meeting will take place on Thursday at 4:30 in Boardroom D on the fourth floor of the C building and on the Interplify platform. I think that's what I have to announce now. So now, if everything is ready, let's move to the launch of the Industrial Development Record 2020. I would like to invite the moderator and the speakers to proceed to the podium. And then after this event, we will continue with the general debate at 4:30 p.m. in this room and on Interplify. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, distinguished delegates, distinguished members of the panel, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this plenary session in which we will officially launch UNIDO's flagship publication, the Industrial Development Report 2022, the future of industrialization in a post-pandemic world. My name is Bethany Bell, and it is my pleasure today to be moderating this session. During this event, we will present the main findings of the Industrial Development Report and discuss the implications for developing countries in a post-pandemic global context. This event will be divided into three parts. First, the Director General of UNIDO, Mr. Li Yong, will open the event. His opening remarks will be followed by a presentation of the main findings and messages of the report by the Deputy to the Director General of UNIDO, Mr. Hiroshi Kuniyoshi. Next, in the second part, a great lineup of speakers will discuss these findings and their implications for developing countries. Their interventions will provide unique insights on how we may build back better from the COVID-19 crisis. And during the last part of the event, we will open the floor, both virtual and physical, to your questions and comments. And so without further delay, we will open the session with the participation of UNIDO's Director General, Mr. Li Yong.
Thank you very much, Bethany. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, distinguished members of the panel, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, friends, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the official launch of the Industrial Development Report 2022. As the UNIDO's flagship publication, the IDR has established itself as a key reference on industrial development. Past editions have examined the impact of the fourth industrial revolution technologies on industrial development, the role of the manufacturing in the creation of the inclusive jobs and the income, the implementation of the fourth industrial revolution technology, and the importance of energy efficiency. The 2022 IDR is being launched in a critical juncture. The COVID-19 pandemic has had and continues to have devastating effects on our economies and societies. Now, not only has the pandemic caused a dramatic loss of life, it has also triggered worst recession since the end of the World War II. The imperative of accelerating efforts to achieve the 2020 Agenda for Sustainable Development has never been more urgent. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, for recovery to take hold, it is critical for us to understand how the pandemic has affected the industrial sector and its future prospects. The report I present to you today provides fresh empirical evidence on the impact of the crisis across countries, industries, and firms. It also identifies key factors of the resilience as well as vulnerability. As countries attempt to enter into recovery phase, understanding these factors is crucial to inform decision makers, policies, and the response strategies. The report emphasized that resilience depends on nations' industrial capability. Industry is a source of employment and income growth. It provides access to essential goods and services. These findings strongly reaffirm the importance of achieving SDG Goal 9 to reach the goals of the 2030 Agenda. The IDR also demonstrates that digital technologies enhance resilience by enabling businesses to continue operating remotely and to maintain their consumer bases. Preparing for the future will therefore require countries to further strengthen their manufacturing and digital capabilities. This alone, however, is not enough. To build back better, greener, and stronger, countries must also accelerate the shift to a green industrial sector. This includes adapting energy and resource efficiency production and the circular economy models with a leave no one behind agenda. Countries must protect those who have been most affected by the crisis, particularly small and medium-sized enterprises, as well as women, youth, and informal industrial workers. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, for these efforts to succeed, the international community must stand united. We must further amplify our coordinated efforts supported by the mutual learning and knowledge sharing. I'm pleased to see this report being launched. I take the opportunity to extend my gratitude to the IDR team and the staff of the Department of Policy Research and Statistics, as well as our able international experts, which I respected very much in the production of this report. I hope that this report will support your decision-making processes as it contributes to the post-pandemic recovery debate. I thank you very much for your contribution and your coordination. Thank you.
We thank the Director General of UNIDO for this introduction to the session. As the DG has just highlighted, the IDR 2022 brings new insights into how the pandemic has created both challenges and opportunities for developing countries in their path towards industrial development. I'd now like to give the floor to Hiroshi Kuniyoshi, Deputy Director General of UNIDO, who will present the main findings and messages of this report. Dear Mr. Kuniyoshi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Bethany. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, distinguished members of the panel, ladies and gentlemen, and colleagues and friends. It gives me great pleasure to present the main findings and messages of the Industrial Development Report, IDR 2022, the future of industrialization in a post-pandemic world. This report is a result of 2 years of intense research efforts and close collaboration between UNIDO staff and international experts. As the world gradually moved towards a sustainable recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, the IDR 2022 reflects on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the industrial sector. The report focuses on the role of the industrial sector during the crisis. It disaggregates the impacts across countries and industries. It also explores the differences in these impacts and identifies areas of resilience and vulnerability. Ultimately, the IDR 2022 builds on those analyses to provide policy recommendations and a call for action to the international community for an inclusive and sustainable industrial recovery. The impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the global economy cannot be overemphasized. The health emergency has triggered the deepest global recession of the past 70 years. That in 2020, world GDP fell by an unprecedented 3.3%. The effects have been felt by workers, households, and entrepreneurs around the world. Over 255 million full-time jobs were lost. An additional 97 million people have fallen back into poverty. the road to recovery ahead is long. The latest estimates indicate that world GDP is still far below the level projected for the current year. It is indisputable that everyone has suffered in this pandemic. Yet, the impact of the pandemic has been uneven across countries and regions. Developing and emerging industry economies were hit harder than industrialized economies. As the figure shows, the average estimated output loss of developing and emerging industrial economies was 7.7%. By contrast, industrialized economies experienced output losses of just under 4% on average. Let me emphasize here that these are averages. The impact on some country groups was far worse. For example, smaller island developing states and other least developed countries in Asia were among the hardest hit, with output losses of upwards of 10%. These are extraordinary losses. But what explains these differences in impact we observed? The IDR 2022 provides a clear answer. Countries with stronger manufacturing systems were able to withstand the crisis better than those with a weaker manufacturing sector. This figure shows the relationship between the size of countries' manufacturing sectors and the estimated loss in output due to the pandemic for the current year. The relationship is clearly and strongly negative. Larger manufacturing sectors are directly linked to lower projected economic losses in both industrialized and developing countries. Colleagues, friends, why is manufacturing important? Because it is key to resilience. Resilience can be defined as the ability of a system to resist and recover from the effects of a sudden shock. Manufacturing drives resilience in a number of areas. First, it provides access to essential goods, such as food and medicines. It also provides critical inputs and sustains national infrastructure. Second, manufacturing ensures the flow of strategically important products and assets. This includes, for example, the equipment that was critical in mitigating the pandemic in its early stages. Masks, personal protective equipment, and ventilators. Vaccines are another notable example. Finally, manufacturing is crucial for the recovery of our economic systems. Historically, the industrial sector has been the engine of economic growth because of its contribution to productivity, trade, employment, and innovation. Then, as now, manufacturing keeps economies afloat and drives them forward. The importance of manufacturing for resilience underscores the centrality of Sustainable Development Goal 9, industry, innovation, and infrastructure for the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The industrial sector drives the economic and social goals of the 2030 Agenda indirectly through its effect on economic growth. Industrialization is also directly linked to many of the socioeconomic SDGs. Technological progress in the medical industries, for example, is linked to improvements in health and well-being. SDG 9 also plays a crucial role in the achievement of the agenda's environmental goals. Similarly, SDG 7, affordable and clean energy, for instance, can only be achieved through the realization of economies of scale and technological change in manufacturing. Let me be clear. Without a green and inclusive industrial sector, there can be no broad-based sustainable development. The pandemic's impacts were heterogeneous, not only across regions, but also across industries, farms, and workers. As regards industries, the IDR 2022 identified two broad groups of industries. The first group consists of industries that experienced either comparatively low impact or a strong negative impact, yet managing to recover quickly. These are robust industries. They include producers of essential goods, such as food and chemicals, industries that faced increased demand due to the emergency, such as pharmaceuticals and medical equipment, and finally, capital-intensive high-tech industries. The remaining industries make up the second group. The group was hit particularly hard by the pandemic and did not recover swiftly. These are vulnerable industries. They include labor-intensive industries such as apparel, leather, and textiles, as well as some capital-intensive industries that faced severe challenges due to cross-border restrictions, such as the transport equipment industries. As regards farms, the report finds that small and medium enterprises were more negatively impacted by the pandemic than large farms. In fact, SMEs operating in vulnerable industries and non-manufacturing sectors suffered the most. As regards workers, the report finds that female and temporary workers were affected more than the others and were more likely to lose their jobs. The IDR 2022 provides an analytical framework to better understand why some countries, industries, and firms fared better during the COVID-19 crisis. The notion behind this framework is that the pandemic's asymmetric impact is attributable to differences in the contexts within which economic actors operate. These differences also affect the capacity of these actors to effectively respond to crisis. Contexts differ for structural reasons, but also because firms and governments respond differently to crisis situations. Among the factors analyzed in the IDR 2022, two are of particular significance, both analytically and in terms of UNIDO's mandate. The first factor is the level of industrial capabilities, and the second is the extent of digitalization. To understand the drivers of resilience at the country level, the IDR team carried out an analysis of the determinants of projected output losses across countries by 2021. The study included three factors expected to amplify the pandemic's economic impact: the severity of the health crisis, the stringency of containment measures, and the reliance of countries on COVID-19 vulnerable industries mentioned earlier. The analysis also included three factors expected to mitigate the impact of the twin economic and health crisis, namely level of income, the relative size of the domestic market, and the level of industrial capabilities proxied using UNIDO's Competitive Industrial Performance Index. The analysis involved a sample of 140 countries covering more than 90% of the world's population. The points below the black zero line on this figure are associated with the lower impact of the COVID-19 crisis. The report finds that the level of industrial capabilities was both negative and highly significant. In other words, a country's industrial capabilities were the most important factor in mitigating the socioeconomic impact of the crisis. Let me turn from country to farm-level data. For this edition of the report, the IDR team collected data of over 4,000 firms in 26 developing and emerging industrial economies. The collection of primary macro-level data is fundamental to understanding the impacts of the pandemic on the ground. The analysis examined several widely used indicators of enterprise performance, including firm survival, changes in sales, profits, and employment. Digitally advanced firms, represented by the bars in red in this figure, are those firms that use the latest vintages of digital technologies in their production process. These firms are better able to weather the pandemic's impact on sales, profits, and employment relative to non-digitalized firms. For example, the drop in sales experienced by digitally advanced firms was more than 3 times lower than that of non-digitally advanced firms. In sum, digitalization has been crucial in supporting firms' resilience in the face of the crisis. The IDR 2022 goes beyond the analysis of current impacts. It also examines the relationships between these impacts and other forces that were already in full swing before the COVID-19 outbreak. Understanding the prospects for an inclusive and sustainable recovery hinges on understanding these forces. The report identifies 3 megatrends in particular. The first megatrend identified is the ongoing digital revolution in the industrial sector. Technological innovation is affecting all spheres of business, changing the competitive advantage of firms and countries. The second megatrend is global economic power shift and the emergence of Asia as the dominant hub of the world's industrial production. As part of these shifts, China is transforming towards a knowledge-driven, high-income economy, a change which has profound implications for trade flows and global value chains. Finally, we observe the greening of industrial production. The decarbonization imperatively calls for radically new business models and systemic changes. The green transition is bound to have far-reaching impacts on the positioning of developing and emerging countries within the global economy. Each of these megatrends can be illustrated by one of the indicators presented in this figure. As the figure shows, these 3 megatrends have been changing the way we live and work for at least 10 to 20 years before the outbreak of pandemic. On the left-hand panel, we see that industrial robot density has tripled over the past 10 years. This is strong evidence of the ongoing technological revolution that is reshaping manufacturing. At the center of the figure, we see the rapid rise of Asia-Pacific developing and emerging economies. Over the past 2 decades, these economies have increased their share of world manufacturing value added by 30 percentage points. On the right-hand panel, we see greening at work. In the last 10 years, CO2 emissions per unit of manufacturing value added have dropped by 15 percentage points. The COVID-19 pandemic has had an impact on all of 3 trends. The UNIDO survey revealed that firms in developing and emerging economies jump-started their use of e-commerce and automation during the pandemic. Perhaps more importantly, we also know that they expect these changes to become permanent in coming years. These patterns apply across all world regions. The UNIDO survey also offers a glimpse into the changing landscape of global industrial production. Of the 4,000 firms surveyed by our IDR team, only the Asia-Pacific region has strong expectations for a rebound of investment in the post-pandemic era. Moreover, according to the survey, firms also expect that the COVID-19 crisis will act as a trigger for the adoption of new environmentally friendly practices and technologies in the near future. To build back better, recovery must move beyond business as usual and opt for a more sustainable and safer path of development. We must gear industrial policies towards the achievement of the SDGs. Policies must take the three megatrends into account, but also risks of new global disasters such as the COVID-19 pandemic. Ladies and gentlemen, recovery from COVID-19 must be green, inclusive, and resilient. Industrial greening can be achieved with a two-pronged strategy. On the one hand, incentives can support the adoption in the business sector of sustainability standards and low-carbon technologies. On the other hand, policies can be implemented to stimulate consumer demand for green products, technologies, and skills. Industrial policies should also promote a socially inclusive development. This, in our current context, means paying special attention to those who are more vulnerable and have been affected more severely by the pandemic, such as informal workers, women, and youth. SMEs must also be supported in the adoption of new technologies, particularly advanced digital production technologies. Finally, post-pandemic industrial policies must integrate resilience and effective risk management strategies in their programs. Prevention and preparedness are key. Indeed, one important lesson the pandemic has taught us is that countries need to build and strengthen their resilience to risks associated with extreme events. The biggest risk, otherwise, is losing years of industrialization efforts to just one major external shock. The global nature of the economic crisis resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic highlights that without renewed commitment to strengthen multilateralism, national efforts to build back better will be insufficient and may make countries' recovery more fragile, uneven, and uncertain. Against this background, the IDR 2022 calls on the international community to actively engage in building a better post-COVID-19 future. Over the short term, the international community must address vaccine rollout and access. Accelerating production and deployment means, among other actions, eliminating export restrictions and expanding technology transfer commitments. Over the medium to long term, the international community should considerate efforts, the international community should coordinate efforts to expand the policy and fiscal space for developing countries. The recapitalization of development banks would go a long way towards achieving this goal. The international community should also help governments in strengthening their capabilities because no industrial strategy will be successful without effective governance. Public-private partnerships will be key to these efforts. The international community must strive to accelerate technology transfer in digital and low-carbon technologies, while also helping countries strengthen their education and science and technology capabilities. Finally, resilience to external shocks can be enhanced by fostering local productive capabilities in strategic industries and by mainstreaming risk management tools within industrial policy practices. Colleagues, friends, closer multilateral and multi-stakeholder collaboration must be the cornerstone of strategies to build back better. Countries and organizations must share their knowledge and experiences for the road to recovery and ensure that no one is left behind. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Kunyoshi, for this very insightful summary of the main findings and messages emerging from the IDR 2022. Now, taking this summary as a background, we'll move to the second part of this session, and it is my pleasure to introduce a panel of distinguished experts who are joining us virtually to discuss these findings in the particular context of the developing countries, in the context of the post-pandemic. It is my pleasure to present to you the members of the panel. Her Excellency, Ms. Hernandez Mora, the Minister of Economy, Industry and Commerce, Costa Rica. Mrs. Xiaolan Fu, the Founding Director of the Technology and Management Center for Development and Professor of Technology and International Development at Oxford University. And Mr. Jeremy Sachs, the Director of the Earth Institute at Columbia University and President of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, who will be joining us shortly. Ms. Bogolo Kenewendo, the global economist and former Ministry of Trade and Industry of Botswana, unfortunately is not able to join us today. So I'm going to sit down and then start the panel discussions by posing the first question to Your Excellency, Ms. Hernandez Mora. Ms. Hernandez Mora, one important lesson from the IDR 2022 is that countries with stronger industrial capabilities weathered this pandemic better than the rest. This is particularly the case in countries with a solid basis in health-related industries like Costa Rica, which also feature as an example in this report. How did Costa Rica manage to develop its health-related manufacturing sector? And to what extent has this industry helped the country's efforts to fight against the pandemic?
Okay, hello. First of all, I want to say hello to everybody. It is a pleasure to share all this report, all the important results of this report in this activity. So it's an honor for me and for Costa Rica that we can share with you some of these specific points. I'm just saying hello in English, and I will do my explanation in Spanish in order I can explain myself in a better way. But thank you very much. Primero que nada, si bien es cierto, la pregunta está orientada a temas que tienen que ver con la parte de dispositivos médicos, yo quisiera primero, antes de entrar a ese tema, hacer un par de acotaciones con relación a los resultados que hoy nos presenta este informe. Hoy, no solamente para el sector de dispositivos médicos, sino en general, el sector industrial de Costa Rica, el sector que nosotros llamamos mediana escala, que probablemente es pequeña escala en otros países, fue el menos afectado con la pandemia. Tuvimos una acción proactiva y tal y como se presentaba ahora en el reporte, de la mano con el sector privado, en una alianza estratégica, nosotros iniciamos generando lo que llamábamos los protocolos de contingencia, digamos, el plan de continuidad del negocio, con la idea de que la pandemia iba a durar 3 o 4 meses y que en la eventualidad de que una persona saliera contagiada, la industria no tuviera que cesar. Características geográficas del sector industrial de Costa Rica, el hecho de que estén muchas fuera de la gran área metropolitana, ayudaron a que el contagio fuera más retardado. Como vimos el impacto de la pandemia, el plan de continuidad de negocio, de un momento para otro, de la mano con las cámaras y con el sector, se convirtió en el protocolo de continuidad de negocio. Ya no era un tema de si una persona se contagiaba o no, era cómo hacíamos para salvaguardar que el sector industrial no cesara sus funciones. Entonces, yo creo que ahí bien se plantea, esa alianza público-privada fue muy clara, porque nosotros, desde el ámbito de la política pública, podíamos ver el problema y entenderlo, pero estos planes se hicieron con especialistas en seguridad ocupacional y con las personas del propio sector que nos iban dando una línea muy clara donde podían ellos ver y mitigar el efecto de los contagios. Entonces, bueno, primero quería hacer esa acotación. Con relación al desarrollo de la industria de los dispositivos médicos en Costa Rica, que indudablemente es un caso de éxito, no es casual. Nosotros surgimos como un centro mundial de dispositivos desde la década de 1980, con más de 70 empresas especializadas, entre las cuales encontramos importantes multinacionales como Baxter, Medtronic, Pfizer. Y desde entonces, la industria de dispositivos médicos se ha venido expandiendo, diversificando y modernizando sustancialmente, pasando de centrarse en dispositivos médicos de clase 2, como los desechables, a los de clase 3, como son los instrumentos quirúrgicos. Hemos pasado de ser un centro de fabricación de baja tecnología a un ecosistema de investigación y desarrollo y de fabricación avanzada. De hecho, entre el 2007 y el 2018, las exportaciones de dispositivos médicos se triplicaron hasta convertirse en la mayor exportación del país. ¿Qué ha pasado con la política industrial? En que hemos desempeñado un papel muy importante en la configuración de este sector. ¿Por qué? Porque el gobierno de Costa Rica le ha apostado, primero, a atraer la inversión extranjera directa en estas empresas. La empresa, por ejemplo, de equipos médicos como Baxter, instaló una planta en Costa Rica en 1987 e Intel eligió Costa Rica como uno de los 3 lugares más importantes para fabricar microprocesadores. Pero poco después, el gobierno y la Agencia de Promoción y Atracción de Inversiones, que se conoce como CINDI, se alejaron del tema electrónico porque vieron que había una enorme volatilidad de esta industria y bajos márgenes para los ensambladores. Además, en algún momento, cuando tuvieron que emigrar en este modelo de solamente ensamblar, obviamente Costa Rica ofrece una condición de garantías y derechos para sus trabajadores que realmente no era como muy conveniente cuando usted está en una industria de tanto retail y usted tiene que producir a muy bajo costo. Entonces nos volvimos a concentrar en el sector de dispositivos médicos, que fue el objetivo basándonos en la experiencia previa, y desarrollamos toda una política de incentivos combinado con inversión específica en capacidades que tuvimos que formar a lo largo de los años, el énfasis del gobierno ha sido ese. ¿Qué hicimos? Generamos educación universitaria en la parte ingenieril, en la parte de proceso, de alto proceso, en la formación de posgrados, pero también en la formación técnica profesional. Se generó todo un paquete de incentivos para las zonas francas, el tema de atracción de inversiones y la parte tramitológica, ¿verdad? Que es algo que nos concierne directamente también en este ministerio, ha sido esencial. Un tema que mencioné al principio, tanto la industria que llamamos de régimen definitivo, que es la que no está en zona franca, como la de zona franca, está ubicada geográficamente fuera de la gran área metropolitana. Y eso genera varios elementos detonadores. Primero, genera fuerza de trabajo y desarrollo en zonas que no precisamente son urbanas. Se da la construcción de edificios, condominios, desarrollos mobiliarios, pero además obliga a la gente a movilizarse, quitar un poco la presión aquí en el centro y además a que la gente de los colegios técnicos profesionales que terminan su secundaria, que tienen una formación más técnica, se sientan motivados a seguir viviendo en estas zonas. El de la estrategia del bilingüismo ha sido un elemento esencial, donde hemos venido inyectando desde hace un poquito más de 3 años, que todos los colegios públicos ofrezcan el bilingüismo como una opción de alto desarrollo para la empleabilidad, indudablemente la estabilidad política del país, sus atractivos naturales, el elemento verde que se conversaba ahora, ¿verdad? Todo esto se ha mantenido con el tiempo. Además, el tema de que la población costarricense es una población, aunque no lo crean, de altos niveles de nutrición. La dieta de la persona hace que la gente siempre esté, como decimos, atenta en sus cosas. Todos los dispositivos médicos manufacturados en Costa Rica deslumbran en el mundo, no porque lo digamos nosotros, sino porque así se califica por su alta calidad, precisión, tiempos de entrega. Y esto ha hecho que las empresas multinacionales sigan eligiendo Costa Rica como un suelo para seguir operando. Esta mano de obra calificada, estabilidad económica, así como incentivos sólidos, son elementos esenciales. Hoy en día, ¿verdad?, operan 8 de las 30 empresas más grandes en el tema de dispositivos médicos, de acuerdo con el ranking mundial de la firma NPO Medtronic. Por ejemplo, tenemos a Abbott, a St. Jude Medical, a Smith & Nephew, a Microvention, Terumo, a Hologic, a Philips, y todo esto se ubica en lo que hemos llamado los complejos de zona franca. La última compañía que recientemente anunció planes de expansión es Edwards Life Sciences, con una inversión de más de $100 millones. El sector de ciencias de la vida hoy representa uno de los principales empleadores de este nivel de población, dinamizadores de la economía y recientemente tiene un posicionamiento importante en lo que es la exportación de productos. Entre enero y septiembre pasado, las ventas al exterior de este tipo de productos superaron los $2 millones de dólares. Y el segundo lugar, y además que esto realmente solo lo supera la segunda vocación que tiene el país, que es la vocación agrícola. Aproximadamente el 20% de estos empleos directos y el 29% de los indirectos se encuentran en empresas que ya hemos llamado ciencias de la vida, de acuerdo con un estudio que hizo la Zona Franca. Para ir cerrando, les podría decir, la industria de dispositivos médicos que se desarrolla en Costa Rica sigue dando pasos firmes. Creemos que tenemos también una ubicación geográfica estratégica. ¿Por qué? Porque somos un país pequeño, llegamos muy rápido a las fronteras norte y sur y estamos a veces, si no es por problemas de tráfico, en 1 hora y media en los primeros puertos, hora 45 en el primer puerto, en el puerto más importante, digamos, de exportación que tiene el país. Entonces, realmente esto se ha venido consolidando. Sin embargo, sabemos que tenemos muchísimos desafíos, ¿verdad? ¿Por qué? Porque el tema de la simplificación del trámite, acabamos de hacer una reforma muy importante, no solamente por ser un país pobre, sino porque realmente era justo y necesario venir y garantizarle una respuesta más rápida al empresariado nacional y al inversionista extranjero. Entonces venimos trabajando de la mano con lo que es la promotora de comercio exterior en todo lo que es la agilización de la cantidad de trámites que hemos identificado para el establecimiento de una empresa. Queremos darle el lugar que se merece a estas empresas productoras de dispositivos médicos, ¿verdad?, en el rol protagónico que además se fortaleció durante la pandemia. No solamente han sido empleadores, han donado equipo esencial para la atención y la prevención de la población y han aumentado las exportaciones y han generado nuevas fuentes de empleo. Entonces, realmente también es justo reconocer que hemos recibido mascarillas, guantes, caretas, recursos para las autoridades de emergencia y durante el primer semestre del 2020, ellos mismos incrementaron sus exportaciones en un casi 25%, generando más de 400 nuevas fuentes de empleo. Hemos venido trabajando también en el establecimiento de un clúster médico que se garantiza con el suministro de productos sanitarios escasos. Ahora, cuando hablemos de otros temas relacionados con pequeñas empresas, también vamos a mencionar esto. Y bueno, yo no quisiera monopolizar el uso de la palabra, pero creo que me he podido expresar bien sobre el impacto que ha tenido la industria, digamos, de dispositivos médicos o de ciencias de la salud en el desarrollo y cómo durante la pandemia su posicionamiento de alguna manera, ¿verdad?, entre tanta incertidumbre que hemos vivido todos, sobre todo desde el ámbito de tomar decisiones en la política pública y apoyar a los sectores, vimos a este sector mantenerse a paso firme, ser oportuno, ¿verdad?, y fortalecer todo ese potencial que tenía ahí guardado. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Hernandez Mora, for your insights on how Costa Rica managed to develop its health-related manufacturing sector during the pandemic. I'd now like to turn to another of our panelists, Mrs. Xiaolan Fu. The IDR ends by calling upon the international community to support an inclusive, sustainable and resilient recovery. As Mr. Kuniyoshi stressed in his last slide, in the short run, this means that ensuring global protection against COVID-19 through vaccine rollout and access. What mechanisms can the international community use to accelerate technology transfer and global vaccine production? And what would be the potential impacts of these actions on developing regions?
Thank you, Bethany, for the kind introduction. And thanks, UNIDO and DG for inviting me to this important event. This year's UNIDO's IDR 2022, this report provides a comprehensive and valuable new evidences on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and the importance of industrial capabilities and the digitalization in strengthening the resilience for post-pandemic recovery. And the report really provides an important and a timely guide for governments and policymakers to develop an effective solution for a more inclusive, greener, resilient, and sustainable development in the post-pandemic recovery. And to answer, Bethany, to answer your question about, I think an effective mechanism that the international community can use to accelerate the technology transfer and global vaccine production is international joint venture and partnerships. Actually, we can see such kind of international partnerships how they works in the case of Costa Rica, as the minister has shown just now. The global rollout of vaccine is crucial to defeating the pandemic. However, the lack of technical know-how and the manufacturing infrastructure for the production are constraining the speedy provision of vaccine globally. This will remain true even if the intellectual property rights of COVID-19 vaccines are waived temporarily. There are other proposed solutions, such as compulsory licensing. However, all these alternative solutions also bear limitations in the transfer of tacit knowledge and know-how. To accelerate the technology transfer and the global vaccine production, we should promote joint ventures between global COVID-19 vaccine manufacturers and global pharmaceutical and local, between the global vaccine manufacturers and also local pharmaceutical companies, so as to create regional manufacturing hubs in each continent. These joint ventures must be supported financially by global North countries, international organizations, host country governments, and the multinational or enterprises. This approach, this is an international public and private partnership. This approach will incentivize the pharmaceutical companies to share not only their patents, but also the tacit production in knowledge, because the risk and the cost of setting up new facilities will be shared. So the pharmaceutical companies will be incentivized. In such kind of partnership, the actors include the multinational pharmaceutical companies who has the patent. Secondly, the local pharmaceutical companies in the regional hubs, Latin America, Africa, South Asia, Middle East. Thirdly, the governments in the global north. And fourthly, the governments in the global south, in the regional or hubs. And finally, the international organizations, such as the WHO, including the COVAX, the United Nations, and the World Bank, IMF, etc. In this arrangement, COVAX will continue to play an important role in leading the expansion of the global vaccine production. Such arrangements will provide benefits and incentives for all the actors involved. Firstly, it will accelerate the production and the provision of vaccine globally. So the governments in the global south, global north, and international organizations would like to see this the benefits from such acceleration of vaccine provision. Secondly, it will stimulate the development of technological capabilities in the global south in the long run. It will build up the capacity in the global south in the long run. And finally, it will also incentivize the researchers and the scientists across the world to keep on innovating. And finally, also very important is that it will also have significant incentives to the multinationals, because they gain access to the markets, gain faster returns to their investment, and also there are institutions to share the investment and the risks. So international collaboration in vaccine production should be open to all combinations of actors, including North-South collaboration, but also South-South collaboration and technology transfer. And following these policy proposals, the benefits is that it will not only help to protect the global community from the COVID-19, it will also present a rare window of opportunity to stimulate the life science industry in the global south and also support the sustainable economic and the technological development in the global south. So this is the moment for us to work together if we want to overcome the current crisis. Accelerating the production of the COVID-19 vaccine through joint ventures and other collaborative mechanisms, and waiving the patents to these partnerships should not only allow us to end this pandemic, but also present this rare opportunity of window to stimulate the technological upgrading in the global south. And this may even pioneer a new way to enhance global or public goods provision. I think the wider implication is that this model actually will present a new way to enhance global public goods provision and global knowledge sharing, which is vital to tackle and we should not waste this unique opportunity. Yeah, that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Professor Fu, for this reflection on how we can accelerate technology transfers among developing countries. Now, I understand we're still waiting for Mr. Sachs to join us, so if I may, I'd like to pose another question to the Minister, please. As we saw by Mr. Kunyoshi during his presentation, not all firms have been affected equally by this crisis. Small and medium enterprises have been more impacted than larger firms. What action can be taken to support the recovery of these firms?
Bueno, pues muchas gracias de nuevo. Me parece, primero quisiera contextualizar dos cosas. La primera es, Costa Rica, al igual que el resto de países, o muchos países de América Latina, tiene un parque empresarial de lo que llamamos MIPYME, que es, ¿verdad?, el micro, pequeña y mediana empresa, que representa una parte importante, constituye más del 95% del sector empresarial, del cual todavía tenemos enormes desafíos, porque representa únicamente el 35% de los empleos y más o menos un 37, un 38% del Producto Interno Bruto. Tal y como lo señala el informe, Costa Rica no fue la excepción. El parque microempresarial fue el más afectado durante la pandemia, pero sobre todo el desafío número uno, que es el parque informal. Entonces, si bien es cierto, hay una base importante de gente que le interesa emprender, emprenden en sus empresas, pero pasan un tiempo en la informalidad, la semiformalidad y la formalidad. ¿Qué pasó? Cuando vinieron los incentivos de gobierno, no había posibilidad de ayudar a la gente que no estaba registrada en ninguna parte. Entonces, en primera línea, fue el parque empresarial más afectado. En segundo lugar, ¿qué pasó con el sector industrial de la micro, pequeña y mediana empresa? Hace poco tuvimos la oportunidad de volver a realizar nuestra primera actividad presencial dentro de esta escala de pequeña empresa, durante la cual aproximadamente el 40% de las pymes, teníamos alrededor de 350 pymes, venían del sector industrial, agroindustrial, textil, cueros, maderas, digamos, todo tipo de elaboración de productos. Bueno, un poco lo que se planteaba en el informe. ¿Qué pasa? La revolución que se puede llamar digital, porque en esa pequeña escala, digamos, no es tecnológica, es una revolución digital, se aceleró a pasos agigantados. Entonces, hemos venido apoyando desde el día número uno, y hay que seguirlo haciendo, cómo ayudar a saltar la brecha, no solo en temas de conectividad, sino en un manejo amigable de las nuevas tecnologías. Tengo que reconocer el apoyo del Banco Interamericano de Desarrollo. Nos ha venido ayudando a desarrollar metodologías como chequeo digital, que significa aquí que a partir de ese momento la empresa puede autodiagnosticarse y ver cuál es esa enorme brecha que tiene con relación al uso de las nuevas tecnologías. Dos, me parece muy importante lo que hablamos en un inicio, las alianzas tienen que seguir siendo público-privadas. Tres, hemos incentivado todo el concepto de la compra pública de toda la industria del país. Recientemente firmamos un decreto y esto alcanza micro, pequeña, mediana y gran industria para que la industria que está en Costa Rica, domiciliada en Costa Rica, tenga alguna especie de bonus, ¿verdad?, para todo el concepto de la compra pública. 4, hemos venido trabajando en todo lo que es la agilización del trámite y como comenté antes, hicimos una reforma muy potente a la ley de trámites, tanto para atraer inversión extranjera como para la formalización de la PYME, declarando silencio positivo de pleno derecho y usando la declaración jurada como un mecanismo de ley para establecer empresas en un día, por tarde en una semana. También venimos trabajando de la mano con el resto de los países de Centroamérica y con Centromipe y con fondos de la OEA para el tema de toda la habilitación del tema de comercio electrónico desde la perspectiva de la pyme y desde la perspectiva del consumidor. Y bueno, fomentar la asociatividad, hacer empresas asociativas sigue siendo algo muy importante. Y además, también venimos trabajando muchísimo el gremio femenino. ¿Por qué? Porque la pandemia demostró que era posible desarrollar negocios desde la casa. O sea, ya se hacía, porque esto es. Sin embargo, muchas mujeres que se vieron obligadas, se han visto obligadas a permanecer en sus hogares, que tienen posibilidad, entonces hemos consolidado e institucionalizado programas orientados a cerrar la brecha de desempleo femenino por medio de la empresariedad. Esas son algunas de las, digamos, iniciativas. Estamos trabajando también con la Universidad de Mondragón y con otras instituciones para encauzar lo que hemos llamado una fábrica de emprendimientos. Y estas fábricas tienen que elaborar, llevar insertos, todos estos elementos. Y el tema clave, que sigue siendo un gran tema, o son dos temas que son muy importantes, es el acompañamiento. ¿Qué entendemos por acompañamiento? Es un abordaje directo, los modelos de abordaje directo que tenemos, tipo Small Business Development Centers, ¿verdad? Y todo este acompañamiento tiene que llevar inserto todo el proceso de transformación digital de la pyme. La pyme tiene que entender que ahora los negocios tienen dos modalidades, el modo digital y el modo presencial. Y por último, para no extenderme más porque tenemos mucho que contar, está todo el tema del acceso al financiamiento. Sí se requiere capital semilla para incentivar todos estos emprendimientos de base tecnológica. Espero con esto haber dado una mirada general a absolutamente todo lo que corresponde. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much indeed, Minister. And I'm now delighted to say we can introduce Mr. Sachs, who's just joined us. Mr. Sachs, to truly build back better, countries need to accelerate the shift towards green industrial development, at the same time ensuring that no one's left behind. What are the key priority areas that governments around the world need to address to achieve this key objective, and how can the international community support this process?
Thank you very much. Congratulations on this wonderful report. I think green and digital does define the agenda, and the key is for governments to understand what green and digital means, to create a policy framework in which businesses can promote investments that are green and digital, and to align global financing with these new investment opportunities, needs, and international flows. We're not there yet by any means, though I think there is greater understanding of both green and digital. On the green side, of course, the main challenge is energy system transformation. We know, and we just went through 2 long weeks at COP26 to understand that this means a really root and branch change of the energy system from fossil fuel based to renewable based. It means not only change of primary energy sources for power generation, but also mass electrification and a mass adoption of especially green hydrogen. So this sets a challenge for every region of the world. What is your future primary energy source portfolio? How is power generation going to be zero carbon? Are you ready in terms of infrastructure for electrification of vehicles, buildings, industry? And where in the global supply chains can your countries fit in for producing the underlying green technologies, whether it's in the mining sector or in processing new materials or in battery supply chains and so forth. Green also entails a change of land use, which is by itself almost a third of total greenhouse emissions. So green means ending deforestation, much smarter and precision agriculture, and other measures to cut wasteful fertilizer use and so forth. The digital side, of course, is also a suite of critical technologies, but I think a starting point is digital connectivity. So having the hardware and the software and the market model to enable mass digital access of both households and businesses and government services online, health, education, licensing, and other critical government services. We are in a world in which only half the world is even on the internet, though perhaps 80 or 90% are within the physical ambit of the internet, but many can't afford or don't use for other reasons internet access. So digital access is fundamental. Digital literacy is fundamental. But as the report makes clear, being able to put smart digital systems, ADP, into business practices is a complex challenge. So I would just end the brief observations with the question of financing. We have an international financial system that is not working to finance the developing countries. There are only two countries that are there are no low-income countries in the world, not a single low-income country that has an investment grade rating from the rating agencies. This means that market capital will not flow to low-income countries. And we only have two lower middle-income countries that have an investment grade rating right now, India and the Philippines. The rest of the lower middle-income world also is sub-investment grade. This is broken because this means that most developing countries are paying crushingly high interest rates for borrowing on international capital markets. And they face regulatory burdens where banks under Basel rules, for example, have to set aside much more capital for holding loans to developing countries than to the richer countries. So the international financial system right now, almost by design, is channeling funds to the rich countries and not to the poor countries. This is leading to a widening gap in industrial capability, in the critical investments that are needed, in the ability of developing countries to invest in green technology. That's the essential failure of COP26, which is that it did not even come close to solving the financing question. Not only not achieving the proverbial $100 billion of promised development finance for climate action, but the much larger sums that will be needed on a market basis in order to enable the green transformation. In fact, I'm not sure that governments are even really aware of how broken the international financial system is in that regard.
Thank you very much indeed. I have a question now to Xiaolan Fu. As we just heard there from Jeffrey Sachs, there is an urgent need to tackle the digital divides resulting from this highly unequal spread of new advanced digital production technologies, not only between countries, but within them as well. How can the international community support the adoption and absorption of advanced digital production technologies in developing countries?
Thank you, Bethany. Yeah, this is a very important question, and I fully agree with what Jeff has said just now. And my research in Africa and Bangladesh find that this new wave of digital revolution may create a new window of opportunity for the global South. Like in Africa, we have seen Kenya has successfully introduced M-Pesa, the mobile payment system. And in Bangladesh, last year, during the pandemic, we have carried out experiments, using a mobile app intervention based on the RCT experiment. And we also find that the household, the marginalized society with access to this digital technology are, they suffer less of the economic hardship during the pandemic. And also, less people lose jobs. The unemployment rate is also lower in the community that's being exposed to the digital technology. And also, the income sources diversified. This is very important for poverty reduction, to diversify their income. However, they face significant constraints in terms of infrastructure and the skills. As Jeff said, the access to digital infrastructure and also the digital skills these are the two major constraints. So my answer to your question for the international community to support the developing countries is to introduce a global industry policy to develop the global digital infrastructure and capabilities. And so this is a sector, we set it as a special sector and use global industrial policy to promote the digital infrastructure and the capabilities in the developing countries, which is key for inclusive and sustainable industrial development in the post-pandemic era. And so in particular, firstly, to set up the global digital competence, a program related to the sectors, to the digital sectors as a special economic zone. So we introduce and coordinate global investment, financing to boost the developing countries, to boost the investment into the developing countries, into the digital infrastructure and the training. So as we have done for the COVID-19, global community work together. Secondly, strengthening the existing UN-led task force for digitalization acceleration. Like, for example, like the UNIDO can lead the industrial digital transformation acceleration in collaboration with other existing UN agencies or task forces. And thirdly, to set up a digital global governance council to enhance the standards, ethics, and regulations, and build up the trust. I think currently, because of the lack of trust and the potential global kind of technology decoupling, will make the developing country, face very difficult decision to choose sites, take sites, or they have to pay for high digital infrastructure if they are, if the lower cost provision from Chinese providers are kind of excluded. So this kind of special economic zone and the global industrial policy for the digital sector will help the developing countries to build up the infrastructure and the digital skills. This not only promotes industrial development, more resilient and sustainable, but it can generate cross-cutting spillovers to accelerate the implementation of other sustainable development goals, including the climate change, or ending the hunger or other global challenges. Because the digital technology is a more fundamental technology, it can offer spillovers for us to solve and achieve other sustainable development goals. That's all from me. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Alan Fu. The question, if I may now, to Jeffrey Sachs. How can sustainable energy solutions, circular economy models, as well as resource energy efficient and cleaner production become mainstream? How can we ensure that this happens not only in industrialized economies, but also in developing and emergent economies?
I think the very good news is that indeed renewable energy resources, especially solar, also wind, have declined in cost so dramatically that they are basically already cost competitive at so-called grid parity or even lower than fossil fuel alternatives. Of course, when one takes into account the multiple co-benefits, even beyond climate change, that is, for example, clean air, reduced pollutants, greater national security by using domestic solar rather than imported fossil fuels, the benefits are tremendous. So the barrier to adoption of zero carbon energy systems is not primarily the costs. The barrier is twofold. One is the still vested interests of fossil fuel producers that are impeding progress in many fossil fuel producing countries because those industries have long had very favorable tax treatment and subsidy and access to government officials and policy making. So the fossil fuel lobby is one practical obstacle. The other obstacle, though, is financing. There are two aspects of the financing obstacle. One is that in general, as I said earlier, the world's really divided between countries that are deemed to be investment grade and those that are not. I think that that distinction is wrongly drawn. It's drawn mechanistically in a way that absolutely punishes poorer countries and gives high ratings to richer countries that are not so well performing. So that's one issue, is that developing countries need more access to financing. In my mind, that includes two different pathways. One is to completely overhaul these investment ratings, which are backward-looking, mechanistic, unfair, not well designed, and lead to self-fulfilling crises of poor countries. And the other is to increase the official development financing that is so important through multilateral development banks and through other official channels, long promised, not really delivered, also through development finance institutions. So I think that this investment challenge is really the preeminent challenge. Governments probably in many places are not aware of all the opportunities that they face. So some governments are saying, we don't want to commit to decarbonization before, in the case of India, even before 2070. But this is actually completely wrong-headed in my view, not only deleterious for climate, but also misunderstanding how strong the prospects are. But the developing countries need access to technology and they need access to finance. And we don't have that solidaristic world that we need for that. And what Professor Fu was saying, completely right, wonderful, put her program into operation of creating a framework for the global public goods of these technology transfers, of the capacity to use the new technologies, and of the large-scale financing to achieve the new technologies. So I'm not worried about the lack of solution or even their high cost. I'm more worried about the practical steps of implementing the decarbonization pathways, taking away the obstacles, the unfair subsidies to fossil fuels, the power of the fossil fuel lobby, and at the same time ensuring ample financing for the new investments?
Thank you so much indeed for those extraordinary insights. That concludes our panel discussion for this session, and it remains for me to say thank you all very much to our panelists for these really excellent insights that have been provided. And this concludes the official launch of the Industrial Development Report 2022, which we really hope you have enjoyed. For those of you who are attending here in presence, you can find copies of the report at the entrance to the room, and those who are connecting remotely will already be able to download the report at www.unido.org/IDR2022. On behalf of the organisers, I'd very much like to thank Director General Li Yong, Deputy Director General Kunyoshi, Her Excellency Hernandez Mora, Xiaolan Fu and Jeffrey Sachs for their very valuable time and participation in this event. We also would like to thank you, the attendees, whether you're here in Vienna or somewhere digitally connected, for joining the discussion. And we really hope also that you can join the other plenary sessions and side events of the UNIDO 19th General Conference. And it just remains for me, Bethany Bell, to say thank you very much for having me as well as your moderator. Thank you.